My family secretly went on a cruise without me. I found out because my sister accidentally sent a video to our family group chat. When I asked what was happening, my mother replied, "Sometimes a family needs a break when they have a burden like you." Rachel followed it with laughing emojis. My father sent a heart. I didn't argue. I didn't beg them to explain. I simply left the chat. That same day, I changed every lock on the apartment they had been living in for free. 2 weeks later, all three of them were standing outside my door begging me to listen. Even now, the strangest part isn't that they excluded me, it's that they seemed genuinely shocked when I stopped allowing them to use me. My name is Joanna, and for years I had convinced myself that my family was complicated rather than cruel. My parents lived in Colorado Springs. My younger sister, Rachel, had always been the one who could do very little and somehow receive applause for it. I lived in Denver, worked hard, bought property, saved money, and became the person everyone called whenever something broke or a bill arrived unexpectedly. A few weeks before the cruise, I suggested we spend the last weekend of summer together. Nothing extravagant. I found inexpensive cabins outside Estes Park and offered to cover the Airbnb myself. My mother immediately dismissed it. "Sorry, Joanna, that's not for us. We don't have money for anything right now." I believed her, because believing her was easier than questioning why I was always helping. Then, Saturday morning, my phone pinged. Rachel had posted a video in the family chat, probably intending to send it to a friend or upload it somewhere else. She was standing on the deck of a cruise ship with the ocean behind her. Steel drums played somewhere nearby. She laughed into the camera before turning it around. My father was holding a margarita, wearing a ridiculous flamingo shirt. My mother was dancing beside him. Their table was covered with shrimp, lobster, cocktails, and food they had spent months telling me they couldn't afford. They weren't surviving, they were celebrating. I watched the video 3 times before typing, "Wait, you're all on a cruise?" The answer came from my mother almost immediately, as though she'd been waiting for the opportunity. "Sometimes a family needs a break when they have a burden like you." Then came Rachel's laughing emojis and skull faces. My father added 1 heart. That tiny red heart somehow hurt more than everything else. I left the chat without responding. I sat alone in my Denver apartment staring at the word burden. A burden. That was apparently what I was after, paying for their groceries, contributing thousands toward renovations on their house, and letting them stay rent-free inside a 2-bedroom apartment I owned in Colorado Springs, because their own home was supposedly being repaired. That apartment had originally been an investment property. When my parents said renovation costs were spiraling and they needed somewhere temporary, I offered it without hesitation. Rachel moved in too. I paid the internet bill. I regularly arrived with groceries. I helped cover part of their HVAC installation, roof repairs, and kitchen remodel because I thought we were helping each other through a difficult season. Apparently, their difficult season included luxury cruises. Something inside me became incredibly quiet. That evening, I drove to Colorado Springs. They were still at sea, so the apartment was empty. I unlocked the door with my master key and stepped inside. Laundry covered the couch. Dishes filled the sink. Rachel's cosmetics and clothes had spread into both bathrooms. Their things had consumed every corner until the apartment barely felt like something I owned. I suddenly remembered all those weekends when I had visited and somehow felt like an intruder. They had acted annoyed when I opened cabinets, asked questions, or mentioned maintenance. Somewhere along the way, my generosity had been rewritten as their entitlement. I didn't destroy anything. I gathered personal items carefully and placed them inside the 2nd bedroom. Then I locked that room. I called a locksmith and changed the front lock, balcony lock, and mailbox lock. I canceled the Wi-Fi that I had been paying for. I cleaned the kitchen, brought my old comforter out of storage, and returned my coffee maker to the counter. Before leaving, I placed 1 note where they couldn't miss it. "Your belongings are in the 2nd bedroom. Contact me when you're back to arrange pickup. Joanna." Then I drove home and blocked my mother, father, and Rachel. For 2 weeks there was nothing. Then came the knock. Through the peephole, I saw all three of them outside my Denver apartment. My mother stood closest to the door. Rachel hovered behind her, arms folded. My father looked exhausted. "Joanna, please," Mom called. "We need to talk. Just open the door." I stayed silent. I watched their faces change as they slowly realized I wasn't going to rescue them from the consequences this time. Rachel muttered something. Dad stared at the floor. Mom knocked for another minute before they finally left. Monday morning, Aunt Michelle called. I hadn't heard from her in more than a year. "Joanna, your mom is really upset. I think you should hear her out. Family is family." I deleted the voicemail. Rachel then texted from another number. "Wow. Real classy move, Joanna." I blocked that number too. Within days, cousins unfollowed me. Relatives stopped answering messages. Mom posted vague Facebook quotes about kindness being repaid with cruelty. Rachel complained online about toxic people who use generosity to control others. Nobody asked me what happened. Eventually, I heard my parents and Rachel had moved into Aunt Michelle's 3-bedroom house. I still stayed quiet. Then my father hand-delivered a note under my Denver apartment door. 5 sentences. "You made your point. We still need a place to live. You're better than this. Stop punishing your family for a joke. Let us back in." A joke. They were calling it a joke now. I laughed when I read it, but there was nothing funny in the sound. When Aunt Michelle began telling relatives I had evicted my parents because they laughed at a meme, I finally posted the truth anonymously online. The cruise, the burden message, the free rent, the groceries, the renovation money. The response was overwhelming. Then Rachel called from another unfamiliar number and quietly asked, "How could you do this to us?" before hanging up. Soon relatives were demanding that I delete everything and be the bigger person. My mother even sent a photo of Max, our 15-year-old yellow lab, staring through a window. "He still misses you." That almost worked. Almost. Then they crossed another line. A neighbor at my Colorado Springs apartment called and said she'd seen Rachel and my father trying to force open the patio door. When confronted, Dad claimed, "This is our house. We just got locked out by mistake." They fled when the neighbor threatened to call police. That same day, all 4 tires on my car were slashed. That was when I finally understood. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They wanted obedience. The next morning, I called a lawyer named Aaron. I showed him everything. He asked whether I wanted to press charges. I said not yet. What I wanted was distance something official they couldn't pretend not to understand. Aaron drafted a cease and desist, ordering them to stay away from my Denver home, the Colorado Springs apartment, my workplace, and my property. Physical copies went to Aunt Michelle's house. Digital copies went out as well. For several days, there was silence. Then my neighbor sent me another photograph. Rachel was standing outside my building, smiling into her phone with my car directly behind her. And underneath the selfie she'd posted online was a caption that made my stomach turn. "Found the snake pit, just visiting the zoo." My aunt had already liked it. Rachel's selfie should have been ridiculous. Instead, it made something cold settle in my chest. My car was clearly visible behind her. The same car that had been sitting on 4 ruined tires only 2 weeks earlier, and she was posing beside it like the cease and desist letter Aaron had sent was nothing more than junk mail. "Found the snake pit, just visiting the zoo." Aunt Michelle had liked it. So had my cousin Ellie, a girl I'd babysat when she was 6. I stared at those names longer than I stared at Rachel's face. These were people who hadn't called me once to ask what had actually happened, yet somehow they had already chosen a side. I screenshotted everything and forwarded it to Aaron. His response was short. "Save every post. Do not engage." So I didn't. That became my new rule. Screenshot, document, block, silence. The next morning, I discovered they'd taken things further. Someone had created a Reddit account using my initials and posted a long response to my story. According to them, I had thrown my sick parents onto the street after years of emotionally abusing them. I was supposedly jealous of Rachel because she was more successful and loved. They claimed I had stolen money from a family renovation fund and then used my apartment as leverage to control everyone. There was even a picture of Max attached, as though my 15-year-old dog staring sadly into a camera somehow proved I was unstable. Reading it was surreal. I knew every claim was false, but seeing those lies arranged neatly in paragraphs almost made them feel official. Worse, strangers believed some of it. They called me manipulative, cruel, a narcissist. For the first time, I understood how easily a family could manufacture an entirely different version of you if enough people repeated it. Then they made a mistake. Among the photos uploaded to prove how normal and loving they were was a picture from the cruise dinner. Rachel was grinning over a plate of seafood, my parents beside her, and behind them stood a cruise employee with a visible name tag and company logo. I zoomed in. The cruise line was obvious. So was the week. I sent a polite inquiry, explaining that I was trying to confirm whether family members had been aboard because I'd temporarily lost contact with them and had concerns. The response I received the next day erased whatever small possibility remained that the vacation had been spontaneous or cheap. My mother, father, and Rachel had booked a luxury suite for a 5-night Caribbean cruise during the exact weekend I'd suggested our family getaway. They also purchased the premium all-inclusive package. They hadn't simply found extra money. They had planned something expensive, while telling me they couldn't afford even a modest trip I was offering to finance. I could have posted the email publicly. Part of me wanted to. I imagined dropping it beneath Rachel's lies and watching the entire story collapse. Instead, I reopened the old family group chat, the one that had effectively died the morning they called me a burden, and sent one screenshot. No caption, no accusation, no dramatic speech. Just the cruise company's confirmation. Then I blocked everyone again. For several hours, there was nothing. That evening, another letter appeared. No return address. Dad's handwriting. You always thought you were smarter than the rest of us. But you forget who made you. You forget who fed you, who raised you. You've embarrassed your entire family for nothing. You're lucky we didn't go further. Fix it, or we will. I read the last sentence twice. You're lucky we didn't go further. It was the first time the hostility felt less like anger, and more like a threat. At 2:18 the following morning, someone started ringing the buzzer downstairs. Once, twice, then continuously. I sat on my couch with all the lights off, staring at my phone. Whoever it was didn't speak through the intercom. They just kept pressing the button. Months earlier, I probably would have gone downstairs. I would have opened the door and tried to talk, because I had spent most of my life believing every conflict could be repaired if I stayed reasonable enough. That night, I didn't move, and strangely, I wasn't frightened anymore. I was exhausted. Something had finally broken cleanly enough that there was nothing left to negotiate. The next morning, I told Aaron I wanted the restraining orders. Against Mom. Against Dad. Against Rachel. I handed over the threatening letter, Rachel's photographs, screenshots of the Reddit impersonation, Aunt Michelle's voicemail, records of the attempted break-in, and everything else I'd saved. Aaron didn't have to persuade me this time. While the paperwork moved forward, I changed my phone number again, locked every social media account, and met with my building manager. I gave him photographs of all 3 family members and explained that none of them had permission to enter the property. I expected to feel relieved afterward. Instead, I felt empty. It was the realization that hurt most. I wasn't losing my family because of a cruise. The cruise had simply forced me to look at what my family already was. Then my mother somehow found another way through. A message arrived, containing a photograph of their house in Colorado Springs. Finished. Fresh paint. New siding. New windows. Landscaping. Stone around the entrance. Porch furniture. Even a newly finished driveway. It looked like a real estate advertisement. Under the photo, Mom had written, "Glad we didn't wait for your help." I almost laughed. I had transferred more than $12,000 to them during the previous year. I paid toward their HVAC installation, part of the damaged roof, and part of the kitchen remodel. I had receipts, bank transfers, messages thanking me when they needed the money. Yet here she was presenting the completed house as proof that they had succeeded without me. For several days, that message bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Not because I needed gratitude, but because their confidence in rewriting reality was beginning to make me question why nobody else cared about the truth. Then Cousin Ellie texted me, "Hey, people are talking. I don't really care what happened, but maybe you should take the post down." I read that line times, "I don't really care what happened" times, and suddenly understood everything. Nobody wanted the truth. They wanted the discomfort to disappear. And because I was the one refusing to pretend anymore, I had become the problem. That realization took me somewhere deeper. Rachel had always been the golden child. I was the difficult daughter, not because I was reckless. I did well in school, got a job young, moved out, worked, saved, bought property. But I didn't smile automatically when Dad made cruel jokes. I stopped attending church when I turned 18. I questioned decisions. I didn't perform gratitude on command. Rachel knew how to make them feel admired. I made them feel challenged. So when I became successful, I started giving. Groceries, bills, renovation money, a free apartment. I told myself I was helping my parents, but underneath that generosity was an embarrassing hope. Maybe if I became useful enough, they would finally see me as someone worth loving rather than someone they tolerated. The truth arrived on an ordinary weekend. I had driven to Colorado Springs to inspect another rental property. On the way back, I passed my parents' renovated house. There was a FOR sale sign planted in the front yard. I pulled over across the street. 10 minutes later, a real estate agent arrived with a couple and walked them through the front door. I sat behind my steering wheel, staring at the new siding, new roof, new windows, and landscaping that my money had helped create. Suddenly, every strange piece of the previous months locked together. They had never planned to move back. The apartment wasn't temporary housing while repairs were completed. It was free housing while they improved the house for resale. My money helped finance those improvements. My apartment eliminated their rent. My groceries reduced their expenses. And while I was unknowingly subsidizing the entire plan, they saved enough to celebrate with a luxury cruise from which they deliberately excluded me. I had spent years thinking I was building a bridge back into my family. They had been using me as the bridge to their payday. That night, I poured myself a drink and looked one last time at Mom's message. "Glad we didn't wait for your help." For the first time, it didn't hurt, because now I understood what she really meant. They had never wanted my help. They wanted everything my help provided, and they wanted me quiet enough not to notice. But I wasn't quiet anymore. The house sold a few weeks later. Nobody told me. I found out because I had saved the listing and watched the status change from pending to sold before disappearing altogether. 3 bedrooms, remodeled kitchen, new appliances, updated roof, landscaped yard, the same improvements I'd helped pay for while my parents insisted they were barely keeping their heads above water. I never learned exactly how much profit they made, and eventually I realized I didn't want to know, whatever the number was. It wouldn't change the part that mattered. They had accepted my money, lived in my apartment for free, taken an expensive cruise without me, called me a burden, and then treated my boundaries like an act of war. A week after the sale, Aunt Michelle posted a photograph from her front porch. Mom had her arm around her. Dad held a beer. Rachel lounged in a lawn chair with sunglasses on and her feet stretched out like she'd been living there forever. The caption read, "Fresh start with my people. Blessed." I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for the familiar anger. It never came. Mostly, I felt finished. After that, the silence became almost complete. No emails, no threatening letters, no relatives calling me about forgiveness. Even my birthday passed without a message from Mom, Dad, or Rachel. A year earlier, that would have destroyed me. I would have checked my phone every few minutes, invented excuses for them, and eventually sent some cheerful message myself just to break the silence. This time I went to dinner with friends, turned my phone face down, and enjoyed the evening. I left my Reddit post online too. Occasionally, strangers sent messages saying their own families had treated them similarly. Some asked how everything ended. I answered when I felt like it. Mostly I kept the post because reading my own timeline reminded me that I hadn't imagined any of it. When people spend long enough rewriting your memories, documentation becomes strangely comforting. Then, almost 3 months after I'd changed the locks, I received an email from the property manager overseeing the Colorado Springs apartment. The subject line was simply, "Tenant visit." Rachel had appeared earlier that afternoon asking to enter the second bedroom and collect things she'd left behind. Management refused because she wasn't a tenant and didn't have my permission. I had almost forgotten about the boxes. Their clothes, paperwork, kitchen items, old photographs, and whatever else they had abandoned were still sitting exactly where I'd placed them. Rachel hadn't contacted me once about them. Neither had my parents. Apparently, they expected everything to remain frozen indefinitely until they decided they wanted it. I didn't want another confrontation, so I arranged something cleaner. I told management to inventory the belongings, package everything properly, and move it to a storage facility across town. I paid for the first 2 months myself and instructed the facility that Rachel could collect the contents whenever she wanted. No letter, no sarcastic message, no demand for repayment. I simply sent the access information through the property manager. Then I waited. 30 days passed. Nothing. On the 32nd day, I received notification that the unit had been cleared after the belongings remained unclaimed and the required process had run its course. Some items were donated, others were discarded. I expected Rachel to call screaming when she found out. She didn't. That was when I understood how little most of those possessions actually mattered to them. Like the apartment, like the renovations, like my generosity, things mattered only while they were useful. There was one part of the story I couldn't detach from so easily. Max. He had been our family dog since I was a teenager. A yellow lab who had spent 15 years completely uninterested in who was right, who was wrong, or which daughter disappointed mom that week. Max cared about food, walks, sleeping in patches of sunlight, and leaning his entire body against whoever happened to sit beside him. When I moved to Denver, I wanted to bring him with me, but Mom insisted he would be happier remaining in his real home. Later, during the fight, she used him like another weapon. "He still misses you." She'd written beneath that photograph of him looking through the window. I hated that it worked, because he probably did miss me. And I missed him, too. Months after the family stopped contacting me, I was scrolling Facebook one evening when I saw a post from an old family friend, one photograph of Max lying in the grass when he was younger, a rainbow emoji. "Rest in peace, good boy." That was how I learned he had died. Nobody called. Nobody sent me a message. Nobody thought I deserved to say goodbye. I stared at the photograph until the screen blurred, then sat down on my kitchen floor and cried harder than I had since the cruise video appeared. I hadn't cried when Mom called me a burden. I hadn't cried over the slashed tires, Dad's threats, Rachel's lies, or even the house sale. But I cried for Max because he had never asked me to earn his affection. He had never compared me to Rachel. He had never remembered my mistakes when he wanted something from me. He had simply loved me when I walked through the door. Strangely, losing him closed something in me. There was no longer any reason to visit my parents' world, even secretly. The Colorado Springs apartment eventually got new tenants. A quiet couple who paid rent on time and treated the place like someone else's property because technically it was. The first month their payment arrived automatically in my account. I stared at the transaction and laughed. Apparently, people really could live in a property without convincing themselves they owned it. I replaced furniture in Denver, repainted the walls, bought a better coffee machine, and started cooking instead of ordering food whenever I felt stressed. Small things, but they made my home feel like mine again. I also started therapy. At first, I told myself I was going because of everything that happened after the cruise. It didn't take long to realize the cruise was only the final chapter of a much older story. I had spent years trying to purchase belonging. Every grocery run, every emergency transfer, every renovation payment, every time I said, "Don't worry about paying me back," had carried an invisible request underneath it. Please see me differently now. I thought if I became successful enough, generous enough, useful enough, my parents would finally stop seeing Rachel as the daughter who belonged and me as the daughter who needed correcting. But love bought through usefulness isn't love. It's employment without a salary. People sometimes ask whether I regret changing the locks so quickly, whether I should have waited until they returned from the cruise and had one calm conversation. Maybe, in another family, that would have mattered. But my parents had spent months living in a home I provided while secretly planning their financial future, then laughed when my mother called me a burden. And when I finally stopped giving them what they wanted, their response wasn't remorse. It was intimidation, smear campaigns, attempted entry, property damage, threats, and manipulation. The locks didn't destroy our relationship. The locks simply revealed what the relationship depended on. I don't hate them. That surprises people sometimes. Hate would require me to keep carrying them around. I hope my parents have whatever life they chose. I hope Rachel eventually learns that being loved doesn't require someone else to be the villain. I even hope Aunt Michelle eventually realizes that family is family isn't a magic sentence that makes cruelty harmless. But none of those things require my participation anymore. Forgiveness, if I ever fully reach it, doesn't mean handing someone another key. I used to think adulthood meant proving that you were strong enough to endure whatever your family threw at you. Now I think it means deciding what you're willing to allow into your life. I gave my family money, housing, groceries, time, patience, and more chances than I can count. I asked for almost nothing in return. They only had to treat me like I mattered. They couldn't do it. So I stopped auditioning for a role in a family that had already decided who I was. I changed the locks, closed the door, and eventually stopped looking through the peephole to see whether anyone was coming back. For the first time in my life, being outside their version of the family doesn't feel lonely. It feels peaceful